Penn State football dropped to 20 in the latest AP poll after an embarrassing upset loss to Illinois this past Saturday in Beaver Stadium. The marathon of 9 overtimes to conclude the game was the longest recorded in college football history. Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of Penn State Sports Night. I'm Lexy Leidlein, joined by Zach Gershman and JC Colavita. We'll look into what went wrong in this Big Ten matchup and look ahead to a familiar foe in the Ohio State Buckeyes. So gentlemen, let's get into it. There were multiple numbers that were very surprising from this Saturday's game. JC, what was the most eye-opening number for you?
Well, mine was 357, as that is the amount of rushing yards that the Penn State defense gave up on Saturday. Chase Brown and Josh McCray, they had their way with the Nittany Lions front four all day long. And if you realize early on, Illinois wasn't really passing at all. The entire world knew that the Fighting Illini was going to hand the ball off. And frankly, the fact that Penn State didn't realize this or they couldn't stop it is honestly deplorable. And you can't be a top 10 team doing this.
Yeah, no, you definitely can. I mean, this game was absolutely horrendous. As a Penn State fan, and to be inside that stadium, it was so tough to watch because you're predicting what's basically happening. I think it's ironic that we lost on a pass play in the end zone because there was only a couple passes for 30-some yards. But the number one stat that really stood out to me was negative 28. That was the amount of rushing yards that Sean Clifford had. Yes, that includes sacks. But coming off an injury, the way that he was coming off of it, you could tell he wasn't himself throughout it. And to put him in that QB draw type situation like we saw last year and we saw did not work out from the get-go, what's the point of doing that? And that's currently why there's negative 28 on the board. The O-line had holes in it left and right. The amount of pressure Sean was getting throughout the contest. Illinois won the Cheez-Its team of the week or whatever, but the cheese was really the holes in Penn State's offensive line because they were all over the place, and that's why Sean had negative 28 rushing yards, and it's comical comparing it to the Illinois stat that JC pointed out.
All right, so now we've ripped off the Band-Aid. Let's clean this wound. That was a very tough loss, especially with, like you said, all the missed opportunities for Penn State to score. Zach, I'm going to start with you. What was the most disappointing aspect of the game?
Yeah, I mean, it disappoints me to see Sean in that type of situation on the board. I mean, it was really tough, and there were so many things that were miserable in this contest, including the weather because it was nasty outside. But I could have pointed out the drop passes. There were plenty of them. Clifford even dropped one himself. Theo Johnson in overtime. Jaquan Brisker dropping the interception. That would have sealed the deal for the Nittany Lions and given them the win. But it has to be the defensive line. Yes, you did lose P.J. Mustafer, even though he was riding around in his cool little motor scooter or whatever he was doing. You lost your defensive line. There's no doubt about it. But that right side of the line on the defense let Illinois run all over the left side of the line. And on top of that, with the defensive line play, there was not a nose tackle under center, basically, by the center. And that's why they kept opening up the gaps and scoring and punching it right up the gut, because there was no defensive line play. Arnold Ebiketie is a stud. He's a baller. He's going to probably play in the NFL, in my opinion, because there's not a guy that hustles the way that he does, as James Franklin said. But that defensive line, now we spoke about the offensive line having holes, that right side of the defensive line is really concerning.
Absolutely, Zach. Penn State's defense did not come to play on Saturday, but I really think that the main problem was the play calling. I've been questioning James Franklin's play calling for years. They're running the ball a lot. You look at their rushing stats, 2.1 yards per carry. When are they going to realize that the rushing attack has not worked all year long? I would say the moniker of the Long Boys is officially gone. And you have the execution was horrible. Obviously, as you said, drop passes like by Brenton Strange and by Theo Johnson, guys who you should be relying on as safety valves in this offense. You obviously have a quarterback in Sean Clifford who's not at 100%, and when your offense just goes through a wide receiver, they can take away Jahan Dotson, who honestly is probably going to be a top pick in the NFL draft. But when you take away your best player, you can't really do much.
I agree with all your points. I think my favorite part of the game is when it was over. So now that we've looked at the past, let's look ahead into the future. We have Ohio State coming up on this Halloween weekend. Zach, what can we expect from these rivals to the east?
Oh, what can you expect? I mean, you're going to expect a hostile environment, and you're going to expect an Ohio State team that's better than Penn State, because this was the game that everyone was looking forward to. I kind of question if this Penn State team was overlooking Illinois because they were looking forward towards Ohio State. You had the bye week in between, and it gave them more time to think. And honestly, they did underperform this past Saturday, as we have spoken about. I wonder if they're going to step up here, but I don't think it's going to happen. The Ohio State Buckeyes are a rejuvenated team. They're a completely different team than what we saw against Oregon. C.J. Stroud has been playing lights out lately, and the team is just doing a lot better than what we saw in the beginning half of the season. They are looking forward to this game because this is life or death for Ohio State in the college football playoffs.
I think Penn State's going to want to play spoiler in this game. I just do not think they have the talent to do it. As you said, C.J. Stroud has been playing lights out. His last 3 games, 14 touchdowns, no interceptions after that shaky start, and he has the best wide receiver core in the FBS available to him. 3 wide receivers with over 500 yards. That's insane. You don't see that usually. But the one thing that Penn State does have going for them is that this Ohio State team is mortal, unlike the ones we've seen in past years. You had the Oregon loss clearly showed that, and their rush defense is not as stout as usually seen, despite Penn State's failure in that rushing game. That is the only way they're going to win on Saturday.
I agree. I think Penn State's going into a really hostile environment up in Columbus, and I really hope they can continue that 1-0 mentality. Well, that's all we have for this edition of Penn State Sports Night. For Zach Gershman and JC Colavita, I'm Lexy Leidlein. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for watching this edition of Penn State Sports Night. If you're a fan of our content, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips. Also, follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we are Penn State Sports Night.